A warm welcome to all of you, lovers of New York City, lovers of history, who are gathered here today to honor and celebrate the life and work of Mayor Edward Irving Koch here at his former residence, 2 Fifth Avenue, on what would have been his 89th birthday today. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, the chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center and the New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance, a committee of distinguished and dedicated individuals and organizations committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of historic preservation in our city. Our thanks to the Historic Districts Council, especially Simeon Bankoff and Frampton Tolbert, who assisted with the approvals and the installation, to Phil Colcott and to the board of 2 Fifth Avenue, and to all of you who have gathered here today. The son of immigrants, Edward I. Koch, was drafted into the Army in 1943, where he earned 2 battle stars in Europe as an infantryman. After attending law school at NYU, he began his political career as a reformer, joining the Village Independent Democrats. He was elected to the City Council in 1966 and then represented the 17th Congressional District of New York City from 1969 to 1977. After a tough primary battle that year, he was elected mayor and faced a $400 million deficit and a crumbling infrastructure. His legacy includes balancing the budget for 12 years in office and the creation of the largest municipal housing plan in the United States. An active and influential political commentator for the last 20 years, known for his wit and one-liners, he is well remembered for extraordinary political instincts, his unabashed candor, and his trademark phrase, "How am I doing?" Edward I. Koch was a quintessential New Yorker whose rise from humble beginnings epitomize the improbable possibilities of our wonderful city. And now we will begin our program of distinguished speakers. Philip Koltoff was the executive director, please come up, Phil, and CEO of the Children's Aid Society for 25 years. Now a professor at NYU's Silver School of Social Work, Phil has written 4 books on executive leadership and nonprofit management, which obviously serve him well as the president of the board of 2 Fifth Avenue. A neighbor and friend of Mayor Koch, he will read a brief appreciation of the mayor. Philip Koltoff.
Thank you, Barbaralee, and distinguished guests. I am first so appreciative of all of you joining us today to celebrate both the birthday and the mayoral leadership of Ed Koch. Many of us who live in the building knew Ed. We can almost visualize his coming in from the front door, looking to see who was around the lobby, and making a right turn to the elevator bank to go up to his apartment. Ed was an unusual man. We all knew of his commitment to the city, kind of a consummate New Yorker. What some who didn't know Ed so well might not have known of his really intimate feeling for both the village and its population, and for a civilized democratic process. He always appreciated the right of people to express difference. And in a way, the expression that we did not anticipate, but the expression of that difference today, I think was in some way an example of the way Ed would have seen the right of people to express themselves. So if this had been scripted, we would have appreciated that. I knew Mayor Koch for many years. As a matter of fact, we joked together about his asking me to serve in some capacities in city government, and each time by saying, maybe the next time. But he was truly this special person, this special friend of New York. All of the residents of this building who knew him and who witnessed his comings and goings appreciated his specialness. The staff of the building, particularly in the last few years when Ed would come down in a tuxedo ready to participate in some event or another, the staff would often greet him right here and say, "Mr. Mayor, can I help you with your bow tie?" And they did. My last conversation with him was perhaps a month or so before he was hospitalized last time. And I said, "Mr. Mayor, I was just going through some of my old folders and putting them in their right places, and there was a great photograph of the mayor with Frank Perdue, of all people, who in fact looked like Ed's identical twin. And Frank Perdue would contribute, Mayor Dinkins knew this, would contribute every year turkeys and chicken to serve 100,000 meals at Thanksgiving. And Children's Aid Society was very involved in that. And so the two of them would come around to what was then welfare hotels, the Prince George and the Martinique, the Regent, and we would serve this together, and of course, press covered it, etc. And I had several of these pictures, so I said, "Ed, I have this picture, great one, with you and Frank Perdue. Would you like it?" He said, No, Phil, you keep it. Someday it'll be worth a lot of money." So you see, he was also a materialist. It would be nice for Ed, along with our other residents who have lived through 2 years of renovation, by the way, the largest one that we're aware of a co-op in the city, a total recladding of this building. So we lived through noise and dirt and what Ed called schmutz for a long time, over 2 years, and now we're just about done with it. We have a beautiful forecourt and building, and it's a pity that Ed couldn't hang around for a while to see this, but he would have appreciated the effort of the board of directors of this building, and especially of some people on the board who really helped to put the whole design together, and that's David Piskuskas. David, raise your hand. And the other board members, and I also want to thank Times Square Construction Company and Argo Management and the people who really did the work. They were working nights out here to get this ready. They did a great job, and we are greatly appreciated. We greatly appreciate their efforts in the name of Mayor Edward Koch. Thank you.
Now journalist, television news producer, and public relations consultant, George Arst was press secretary for 3 years to Mayor Koch. For 18 years, he worked at the New York Post as their political reporter, City Hall bureau chief, and columnist. He has been executive director of Fox 5 News, in charge of editorial content for the 7 and 10 o'clock newscasts, and advised Good Day New York. He currently provides counseling, I guess to everybody, but also in many areas such as crisis management, media relations, broadcast marketing, and advises city and state officials. George Arst.
I was just thinking that the display we had before would have been perfect for Ed, because Ed loves street theater. And whether he was part of an engagement where he was tackled by a doctor, or people were against a jail, he just loved the beat of New York and how it and how we all marched to that beat. And so at first I thought he had actually staged a demonstration.
Maybe he did.
Maybe he did, yes. This was our roundtable. This is where we came for 23 years to discuss politics, to discuss government, to have unrelenting barbs against the people in office or the people who were trying to achieve office. Apartment 16-0 is where we came. We had lunch there. We had hors d'oeuvres there. Then we picked a restaurant to go to, and it had to be a new restaurant. Ed really didn't like to go to old restaurants. And so many of them were in the village. We wouldn't go too far, although there occasionally we would go to Peter Luger's. And we always discussed the events of the day. Ed ate and drank politics and government. He believed in New York. He loved New York. And this is what he came here for. And when you sat down with him, whether it was in the office in at City Hall or whether here, he had a mind like no other person I ever met. He would always get right down to the kernel of the issue that we were looking at. And we would have discussions about it. And usually we couldn't move him one way or the other, as Diane would know. But we tried, and we could wear him down, but usually it didn't work well. We all miss him dearly. He was a good friend, a wonderful friend to have, extraordinarily loyal to us, extraordinarily loyal to New York. He even loved his rivals, and one of his rivals lived in this building, Bella Abzug, and Ed said it would be nice to have a statue of her in the village. He felt, even though they argued on almost everything, he felt that she was an iconic New Yorker, and that she should be rewarded for bleeding as much as he did about New York. So for all of us, we thank Barbara for putting this together, and this is well-deserved. Thank you.
George. We share that view that Bella Abzug was an iconic figure, and we are in the process of finding another location where she lived. And if any of you have any information, please share it with us. I'm reminded after listening to both of you that it does take a village. And this building, am I correct, Phil, 300 apartments? Over 300 apartments and over 1,000 residents. Our next speaker, Diane Coffey, many of you know as an admired movie star, but is the managing director at Peter J. Solomon. She was Mayor Koch's administrative assistant when he was a congressman in Washington. She became his longtime chief of staff at City Hall, and in 1987 also served as the acting commissioner of cultural affairs. She's vice chair of jazz at Lincoln Center, on the board of the Gracie Mansion Conservancy, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, among other commitments. Diane Coffey.
Well, first, thank you, Barbaralee. Thank you very much for putting this together, as George said. I wanted to say about Ed and a little bit about landmarks. Our first landmarks chair, Kent Barwick, is standing right there. He was chairman of the Landmarks Preservation Commission under,
He wasn't the first.
under
He was
the
one
mayor.
of the best.
He was ours. That's what I remember, right? And but one of the things that should be signified about that is that Ed always believed that the Landmarks Preservation Commission should do its job, and he interfered almost never. I can remember maybe once, but Ken says never. But one of Ed's hallmarks was that he hired people and gave them the authority to do what they thought was best. Now, we always had to keep him informed. That was part of the arrangement. We could never go off on our own half-cocked and not understand what our mission was. But he was a great man to work for, a great mayor, and as George said, beyond loyalty. I mean, he was a wonderful boss because you could bring up any idea that you might feel had merit. And while he may not have agreed, you had the opportunity to do it, and there were never any repercussions. I mean, he and I used to argue a lot, but I was still there, and it was fun. I mean, because he was a great person to spar with, and if you didn't feel he had done or was approaching an issue, any kind of a situation in New York, the way he should, you could tell him. He might not like what you said, but you could at least tell him, which was very important. Anyway, this is a great honor to recognize the mayor in this building. I have to say, he loved living here. He loved it. He would love those benches, David, up there, because he liked the approach. He loved the idea that you could drive the car here. I came with him to see his apartment before he moved in. And of course, like Ed, he recognized materialism, but he wasn't materialistic at all, not in the slightest way, and he never wanted to own anything. So he came and was a renter, and it was a great thing, and we furnished his apartment together so that he elevated his presence, I would say, from 14 Washington Place, which was a small apartment. Anyway, he loved living here. He loved, and he did love, as George said, the fact that there were some political foes living here as well. He used to enjoy that occasional sparring in the lobby with Bella and also Larry. Yeah, also Larry. So anyway, thank you so much, Barbaralee, for making this possible.
Diane.
We appreciate it.
Mayor Giuliani had planned to be here and sends his genuine regrets that he will not be able to join us today. He and his family are out of state attending to a very close family member who is having a serious operation. He sends his warm greetings to all and has asked his long-term, I believe lifelong friend and former first deputy mayor of the city of New York, the well-known and well-respected Peter Powers, to read the remarks that Mayor Giuliani had prepared. Peter Powers.
The mayor did prepare remarks, and he certainly wanted to be here, but he had to be in Pennsylvania. I won't read all of his remarks, but I will highlight some of the thoughts that he really wanted to impart about Ed Koch. He thinks Ed Koch is a man who had a vision, a man who just didn't take the city and leave it the way he found it. When you look back, when Ed Koch took over the city was literally bankrupt. It was known for its graffiti. It was known for a city that perhaps had passed its glory and just wasn't going to recover. Ed Koch couldn't accept that. And he went on, he balanced the budgets all those years in a row, which was not an easy task back in those days. and really restored the faith that the people had in themselves, that this would be a great city again, and Ed helped do that. Rudy mentioned the story. It happened right after 9/11. He had called a lot of business and civic leaders together, including Mayor Koch and Mayor Dinkins, to talk about where we would go from here, and they were talking about the service to be held on September 16th. And Ed Koch was saying, some people said do it indoors because in case it rains. Ed Koch reminded everybody of the Simon and Garfunkel concert, and Ed said, we had 1 million people in Central Park. Henry Stern was there and looked at him. He was Ed's Parks Commissioner, said, Mayor, we only told you it was 1 million. So when Rudy was running for mayor first time, his habit is to take notes, get everything about every fact that he can, and put clips and everything on it. You have to see it. And in preparing, he thought he was going to run against Ed, actually. So in preparing, one day his advisor said, you know, just be yourself. You know enough to get out there. Do you think that Ed Koch knows all of this stuff? Well, Rudy finally realized afterwards, Ed Koch did know all of this stuff. He knew how to run the city, he knew how to make it happen, and the love of this city just stuck out there. I will read one part of the mayor's final words here to his friend Ed Koch. He said, I realize Ed Koch did in fact know all of that stuff. Mayor Koch knew as much as anyone about how city government functioned. But what really made him great is that he knew what he believed. He had a vision of a city restored to grandness and greatness, a city where all people could find a home and a job, and then he went on to work to enact that dream, and that's Ed Koch. Ed, how did I do?
The unexpurgated version of the remarks that Mayor Giuliani sent on started with the line, Ed Koch was a giant. And then he goes on to describe why. I thought I'd share that thought with you. And now, to our Mayor Dinkins. A veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, Mayor David Dinkins began his career in public service in 1966 as a New York State Assemblyman representing the 78th District. After that, he was president of the New York City Board of Elections, city clerk, and eventually Manhattan Borough President, prior to his election in 1989 as the city's first African-American mayor. During his tenure, he instituted the Safe Streets Model criminal justice plan, established the Beacon schools that provided social services within the community. A founding member of the New York State Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus, the New York State Council of Black Elected Democrats and 100 Black Men, Mayor Dinkins is a lifetime member of the NAACP, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations. Among his numerous boards are the Coalition for the Homeless, Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, and the Steering Committee of ABNY. Currently, he is professor in the practice of public affairs at the Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Mayor Dinkins.
Thank you very much, Barbaralee. You be sure to tell the ambassador that we all send our regards. I am delighted to be here. When I got word that it was going to be such an event, I said, count me in, and I'm happy to be here. Barbaralee, as you know, is chair of the Landmarks Advisory Committee and chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, a dear friend and devoted New Yorker. You've done so much to celebrate the history of our city and to bring it alive, and for that we are grateful.
Thank you.
There are many distinguished individuals here because we have been celebrating the life of Nelson Mandela. I have adopted an African custom that diplomats frequently say, instead of acknowledging everyone, they'll say, usual protocols observed. So I say, usual protocols observed. And that means that veteran New York Times newsman Sam Roberts will not be further acknowledged. Known Sam for at least 50 years. And he doesn't age, I do. I'm sorry, Peter, that Rudy can't be here, but please tell him I send my regards, and I hope that his friend or relative recovers. I am at the age where I understand these things. Phil Kalthoff did one of the nicest things that anyone has ever done for me. He attended my father's funeral, and then he established a scholarship at the Children's Aid Society. Each year, I come and present that scholarship myself, and Phil, I thank you. And my father, thank you. George Arts is a very special guy. I've known him a long time, and we've been friends. Whether or not we were supporting the same candidates. The one thing you could be sure about George, he'd give it to you straight. And I liked him a lot. Now, I don't want to fail to mention the next lady, and I tell her often that she's the best thing that ever happened to Ed Koch. Diane Coffey. She really is. So it's a pleasure to join you for the dedication of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center Cultural Medallion in honor of Mayor Edward Irving Koch, here at his home in the neighborhood he loved and the city he loved. This medallion is yet another way of permanently recording the lasting influence that Mayor Ed Koch had and continues to have on the city he loved and cherished. This is an important, but in a way, unnecessary designation. For Ed Koch was not so much about a place, he embodied the spirit of the place we all call home. Mario Cuomo once said that one campaigns in poetry but governs in prose. I supported Ed Koch against Mario Cuomo in 1977 in that runoff. Percy Sutton had ordered us to. Well, Ed Koch governed in theater, a one-man show of wit and wisecracks. Canny one-liners and determined pronouncements, all underlined by his deep commitment to New York City and its people. Whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him, and I did both, many times over the years, it was clear to all around him that he loved New York with his trademark tenacity. He was a symbol of our city for many years, known around the world for his outspokenness and grit. He was many things to many people: a mayor, a congressman, a veteran, a reformer, a liberal with sanity, a Democrat, and I'm told famously, at least for one point, a Republican, a devoted member of the Jewish faith, a movie critic, a People's Court judge, an author, a law partner, even the reason why Manhattan still has its 212 area code. In all ways, New York City's greatest fan and cheerleader. For many years, Ed Koch gave the people of our city spirit. He pulled the city out of a fiscal crisis, paid off the city's debt in 3 years instead of 4, stood up to the transit workers and rallied New Yorkers over the Brooklyn Bridge in the midst of a transit strike. Who can forget that? He signed a gay and lesbian rights bill. He launched ambitious housing programs, which we continued after he left office, and which eventually built or rehabilitated more than 200,000 units of affordable housing, helping to revitalize our city's neighborhoods. Mayor Edward Irving Koch left office in 1989, but he never left service to the city. He loved the people of New York City, and he did his best to make their lives better. In death, as in life, Ed is larger than life, a landmark of the passionate irascibility that is the New York we love. There isn't one among us who can't imagine Ed might now be looking down upon us. And come on, you know I couldn't resist asking, how am I doing? And the answer, Mr. Mayor, is you're doing great. You did well, we remember you, and we love what you meant for the life of the city. He said when arranging for his own burial plot, I don't ever want to leave New York, even when I'm gone. Ed, all the best. You'll never leave New York.
Mayor Dinkins, you did great. That was a wonderful, wonderful tribute to Mayor Koch. Thank you. For more than the last 8 years, award-winning author and journalist Sam Roberts has been the New York Times Urban Affairs correspondent. He is also the host of New York One's weekly hour-long show called Close Up. Before joining the Times, he worked at the Daily News for 15 years, first as a reporter, then city editor, and as political editor. Sam Roberts has won awards from the Society of the Silurians, the Newspaper Guild of New York, and the Peter Kiss Award from the Fund for the City of New York. His most recent and timely book is entitled Grand Central: How a Train Station Transformed America. That was published just several months ago. Thank you for joining us, Sam Roberts.
Barbaralee, thank you, and thank you for doing this. Ed Koch was, of course, a living landmark, so it's appropriate that his life here be commemorated as a cultural landmark, too. Mayor Bloomberg told mourners almost a year ago that no mayor has ever embodied the spirit of New York like Ed Koch did, and probably no mayor ever will. Tough and loud, brash and irreverent, full of humor and chutzpah. He was also the last mayor, at least certainly the last mayor I covered, with a real sense of humor. Forgive me, Mayor Dinkins. Because he could also laugh about himself. And he would have appreciated Randy Borscheidt's observation at his funeral about Ed Koch, a man who didn't drive, that the street closings at his funeral resulted in the ultimate New York tribute, a traffic jam. He bought a plot at Trinity Cemetery uptown before he died, and that was the first time he owned his own place. As Diane said, he preferred to spend his entire adult life as a renter, right until the very end, most of that time right here in Greenwich Village, beginning in 1956 on Bedford Street. In 1967, he moved to Washington Place. That was the famous rent-controlled apartment that he originally considered more appealing than Gracie Mansion. It had a working fireplace. It had an occasional rodent, but he said it always felt familiar. I know where everything is. And after he left the mansion, he moved here to 2 Fifth Avenue, felt at home. It was close to his favorite restaurants. It was also where some of his neighbors included, as people mentioned, some of his favorite adversaries, Larry Kramer and Larry's dog, who was also an adversary, and Bella Abzug. And he would convene, as George mentioned, his midday Saturday salons. He presided over about 2,300 of them over the years. The last 2 decades of them were here. The only thing harder to come by than original conversation was consensus. He said to me one time that we now refer to the stories by number because they had been told so many times. Over the year, they sort of merged and evolved into a jaunty combination of crossfire and old Jews telling jokes. I was lucky enough to attend a few of them and even write about them. And here's one measure of just how quotable Ed Koch was. Since 1983 alone, when I joined the New York Times, my byline appeared on 477 articles that mentioned him as mayor or former mayor of New York. Unlike his successors, or many of them, except for Mayor Dinkins, he was perpetually accessible to the press, almost to a fault. A reporter having exhausted every other avenue of inquiry once playfully asked Ed Koch his favorite color, to which the mayor earnestly replied, blue. He spoke his mind, and even his critics appreciated that. I have to say, in all the years I've covered mayors, and that goes back just about to Mayor Wagner, I never encountered another public figure who was as candid, whose comments could get him into such trouble, and who accomplished so much as Ed Koch. Thank you.
For those of you who are not aware, they are porcelainized enamel plaques that are affixed to the exterior of buildings throughout New York City to commemorate an individual or an occurrence that has made a significant contribution to New York City's rich cultural heritage and to create a sense of pride in our history. Most of these people or events are nominated for inclusion by members of the public, and we invite you to do the same. There are approximately more than 100 cultural medallions already in place throughout all of New York City. To learn more about our programs, please see HLPCculturalmedallions.org. And while you're doing that, please see our new initiative. More than 107 dedicated and illustrious New Yorkers have joined together in the New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance. We will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of the New York City Landmarks Law in 2015. And we think that's a good enough anniversary that we've already started to celebrate. We will go outside for a moment so that we can unveil the medallion, and Simeon Bankoff, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, will read the text of the medallion. Later today, if the spirit moves you, another medallion will be installed at 3 p.m. at 128 East 19th Street for Lincoln Kirstein, co-founder of the New York City Ballet, and whose organization was the precursor to the founding of the Museum of Modern Art, a man of many complex parts and contributions. Before we go outside, I want to thank again to Fifth Avenue, its board president, its trustees, its occupants, and its hospitality for inviting us all to join in a light buffet lunch afterwards. But thanks to each and all of you for joining us today to honor Edward Irving Koch here where history happened. So can we go outside now and you can hear the text. Thank you all.
Edward I. Koch. Edward I. Koch, December 12, 1924 to February 1st, 2013, 2 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan. Edward Irving Koch, mayor of New York City from 1978 through 1989, was born in the Bronx to immigrant parents. During his 3 terms in office, he executed 12 balanced budgets, created the largest municipal housing program in the country, and restored the pride and the spirit of the citizens of New York City. A graduate of NYU Law School in 1948, he began his political career as a reformer, joining the Village Independent Democrats. Elected to the City Council in 1966, Congressman Koch represented the east side of New York City in the House of Representatives from 1969 to 1978. Following his mayoralty, he became a partner at a law firm and continued to play a role in politics. He wrote a weekly column for several publications, appeared regularly as a commentator on radio and television, and may best be remembered for his trademark phrase, "How am I doing?"
I guess the easy part is the paperwork, because the live